Physics, Technology, and Astronomy. Our speaker is very well known Dr. C.S. Unnikrishnan, Professor of Physics at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, and visiting professor at Raman Research Institute, Bangalore. He is a member of Indigo Consortium, the Indian Initiative for Gravitational Wave Observations, and the LIGO India project for installing and operating an advanced laser interferometer gravitational wave detector in India. His research interests are experimental and theoretical aspects in gravity, cosmology, and quantum physics. He has published over 170 research papers covering several areas of fundamental physics. He was part of the team that pioneered experimental gravitation studies in India in a special underground laboratory at Gauribidanur, Karnataka. He was member of the group at Castrol-Brosel Laboratory in Paris that achieved the Bose-Einstein condensation of metastable helium. And back in India, he directed setting up the laser cooling laboratory at TIFR Mumbai, in which India's first Bose-Einstein condensate was produced and studied when he was the principal scientist of the Fundamental Interactions Laboratory at TIFR. On the behalf of entire Physics Club, I am honored to welcome Dr. Unnikrishnan sir.
Thank you, Bhavya.
And now I would like Dimple ma'am to please say a few words and welcome sir.
Yeah, thank you, Bhavya. On the behalf of the Department of Physics, I welcome eminent Professor C.S. Unnikrishnan sir to this Sarabhai online series. And I am also thankful, sir, for accepting our invitation and agreeing to deliver a talk on the gravitational waves. This program is one of our effort to spread the knowledge and contribution in the field of astrophysics. So our eminent speaker, by sharing their knowledge and vast experience, will surely benefit our students, sir. So thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitations once again, sir. Thank you, Bhavya.
Okay. Shall I share the screen?
Yes, sir, sure.
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening. I know that you are a very active physics club there. I've participated earlier in your activities. Today we are discussing gravitational waves, which is the waves of gravity. Now, these waves were predicted more than 100 years ago by Einstein. Its physics was discussed for several decades until some technological methods for the detection became very clear. Then the technology development happened for decades. Now, after the detection of the gravitational waves in 2015, now there is a vast amount of astronomy also done with these waves. So that's what we are going to discuss today. The outline of this talk, first I will talk about the context of this talk, which is of course the discovery, detection. Then I want to talk about the brief reminder about the nature of gravitation as a phenomenon. I want to give an introduction to the generation and properties of gravitational waves. Then there are instrumentation principles we should discuss, which are required for the detection of gravitational waves. The operational detectors of gravitational waves are few in number. There are two in the USA and one in Europe, one in Japan that we will mention. Then we will discuss the detection of gravitational waves and what can be done after detecting these waves from astrophysical sources. So summary of the results in physics and astronomy so far. After that, I will just mention future plans for detection for gravitational wave astronomy. The proposed LIGO India detector is one main component, which Bhavya mentioned. And it's a detector planned in the Indian collaboration to be set up in India and operated here. Now, that completes sort of our discussion of the gravitational waves. But now, after all this, we can ask the question, do we understand everything about relativity and gravitation now? Because we have sort of detected and tested with almost the last prediction of the general theory of relativity. Okay, so I mentioned we have to ask the question, do we understand everything about relativity and gravitation now? I will point out a fundamental inconsistency between what we see and what we believe about the theories of physics. And I mentioned the future of the foundations of physics, where it is likely to go. Now, the context of the talk is, of course, this detection which happened in 2015 of a signal which corresponded to the arrival of the gravitational waves from an astrophysical source. The signal was what is called a chirp, some signal which is the frequency and the amplitude keeps increasing and then it stops after some time. So it's lasted only for about 200 milliseconds. What is this here? It is a strain versus time here. Strain means what is being measured is just the distance between two suspended mirrors, separated by some distance L. So what I'm saying is that the signal which you see here, which is what is detected in this gravitational wave detectors, this is a strain as a function of time. It means one is measuring just the distance between two mirrors, which are suspended with a separation L, and one is measuring the change in this distance delta L. So what is being plotted here is the strain delta L by L. Now, what is remarkable about the signal is its magnitude. You can see here it's 10 minus 21. What it means is that if you have a 1 meter separation between these two mirrors, the length changes only by 10 to the power of minus 21 meters, which is less than a billionth of an atomic size. So that is one remarkable fact. Of course, here there are two detectors labeled Hanford and Livingston. They detect the signals almost in coincidence with the time difference less than 10 milliseconds. So these are the features of this signal which was detected in 2015. And this is what we are going to look at. Such waves were predicted by Einstein in 1916 from his general theory of relativity, which is a theory of gravity, which is a leap from Newton's theory of gravity. And this detection was being attempted from 1960, and the detectors used were in development for more than 25 years. For example, the first attempts were made by somebody called Joseph Weber from 1960. Since the signal was known to be a strain, he naturally used some piezoelectric crystals stuck onto an aluminum bar trying to detect gravitational waves. It didn't succeed. Then it took another 50 years to build a new kind of detector, which are just Michelson interferometers, which all of you know about and probably use in the lab as well. But these are gigantic Michelson interferometers with an arm length of about 3 or 4 kilometers. So the separation between these two mirrors is 4 kilometers. As I said, a signal is a strain, and when you have a larger length, you also get a larger displacement. Now, all of you are very familiar with the gravitational interaction. It's all around us. The first discovery is about gravitation on Earth. Perhaps one can start with looking at its value. Galileo measured it using inclined planes, Huygens, Newton, and so on, using pendulums and maybe various other techniques. This can be measured. But an important discovery was made by Galileo, which is called the universality of free fall. What it means is, it is known from his experiments as well as arguments, which is detailed in this book, very delightful book, Dialogues Concerning Two New Sciences, where he talks about two objects falling from a large height with exactly same rate of fall or acceleration. So the point is, if you drop two objects in a gravitational field, whatever they are, whatever their properties are, they fall at the same acceleration, which is called the universality of free fall. Of course, we must have observed such things here as well, but people would have noticed it also. But finally, it was Galileo who formalized it. Now, universality of free fall applies to the free fall of any two objects. Always, it is true that in a gravitational field, uniform gravitational field, these two objects fall at the same rate, which is manifest when you talk about what is observed in spacecrafts, for example. Everything is falling at the same rate. Therefore, there is no relative fall between two objects. The spacecraft as well as whatever is inside there is falling together. Therefore, we feel that we are floating without gravity. But one should note that there is gravity, which can be seen. For example, if you had a globe of water, it will not have a spherical shape even inside a spacecraft in which we don't feel gravity, because there are tidal distortions of this object and it will look elongated. We will talk about this later. Now, Bhavya mentioned our own experiments in studying gravity in underground laboratories in India. So we looked for the universality of free fall is the basis of the modern theory of gravity. So even a slight violation of this universality will affect the theories of gravity. And we did some experiments in a laboratory specially set up in a place called Garubidanur in Karnataka with a torsion pendulum, studying some of these things. The principle is to, if you have two objects, instead of dropping it towards the earth, you can also attract it from the side using another laboratory mass. If you have a very sensitive instrument, you can do this kind of an experiment. That's another way of testing Galileo's universality of free fall. This is very important in gravitation research. We have done such experiments. Now, it was Newton who realized that this gravitation as a phenomenon applies to the entire universe, perhaps. So he realized that even Moon is in its orbit around the Earth because of the same gravity which makes the apple fall on the surface of the Earth. So therefore, he could formulate a law of gravitation, which is the inverse square law. So it was Newton who devised this relation between the gravitational acceleration, rate of free fall, and the mass of the source, which is source of gravitation, and then the important distance dependence, the inverse square law, which Newton devised. Later, mathematical development happened where one realized that the gravitational acceleration could be also, or the gravitational field could also be represented as a gradient of a potential, gravitational potential, which is of course 1 by r potential. So this was the mathematical representation of the interaction of gravitation, which was done in Newton's time. Now there's another way of understanding gravitation, the inverse square law of gravitation, which is done by Gauss, the mathematician and polymath. What he formulated was the following. If you have a spherical area, area in 3 dimensions, the area of such a sphere increases as r square. So if you imagine gravity as due to a field, a particular field, radial field, with radial lines going out from a source at the center in 3 dimensions, the number of field lines per unit area will of course be 1 by r square, because the spherical area increases as r square. The density of the field lines per unit area will decrease as 1 by r square. So this was Gauss's way of looking at forces like gravity. The number density of field lines per unit area of a sphere in 3 dimensions. You can immediately see that this is a nice way of looking at gravity, because if you ask a question whether space has more than 3 dimensions, this is a way of testing, because then the 1 by r square law will change. People do such experiments to study gravity. So these are all different ways of looking at the same interaction. Now, there is a similar relation which is very familiar in electromagnetism, the Coulomb's law of attraction between 2 charges. It's also a 1 by r square law. It's a Coulomb's law, except that it is between 2 charges, and there is, instead of gravitational constant, there is some other constant which comes here. But the distance dependence is exactly same. Now Newton discovered another law, another fundamental law as well, right? It's called Newton's law of motion. It is completely independent of Newton's law of gravity. This law states as an acceleration, when any kind of force is applied on a body, the body will accelerate. It can be a gravitational force, it can be electromagnetic force, it can be any other force. There's a universal law that the acceleration due to any force is given by that force divided by the mass of the body. Okay, this is a completely independent law from the law of gravity. But however, you notice here the mass which is appearing here is also called inertia. Inertia to motion, inertia to movement. You try to move something, it resists with some inertia. Now surprise is the following, which is very, very important in the physics of gravity. The inertia in the general law of motion, Newton's law of motion, applicable to all instances of movement and forces, seems to be the same quantity called the mass in the law of gravity, right? In the law of gravity, there is a mass which is appearing. In the law of motion, there is also a mass which is appearing. They seem to be the same quantity. Here, in comparison with electromagnetism, we will say electric charge is a charge of electric field. Similarly, mass can be thought of as a charge of gravity. Why should the same charge appear in the Newton's law of motion, which is applicable to all forces? So mass is playing a double role. It has a role as a charge of gravity, then it has another role as an inertia to motion, which is very surprising. Is it the same quantity? Is it a coincidence? Does it imply a deeper meaning? This is an open problem in physics. So nobody has found an answer to these questions. Let's look at it again. If the quantity which is appearing in the law of gravity, g/m by r square, is the same as what is appearing in Newton's law, then when you look at the gravitational acceleration, the acceleration due to gravity, then the two masses will cancel out and you will get just g/m by r square, which is independent of the mass of the falling body. So this is a universality of free fall. So the universality of free fall is a correct fundamental law only if inertia is same as a charge of gravity. It should be exactly the same quantity appearing in both. Why is it so surprising? Look at the law of electricity, electromagnetism. There the force is the product of the two charges and 1 by r square. The acceleration due to electric field is of course F by m, and that has the charge to mass ratio, the ratio of the two quantities, the ratio of the electric charge and the mass. That kind of a ratio doesn't appear here because it is the same quantity. So there is no universality of free fall in electric field, but there is universality of free fall in a gravitational field. But both are 1 by r square laws. So that's a kind of structure I was just building up. So inertia seems to be identical to the gravitational mass or the gravitational charge, and this is called the weak equivalence principle. Inertia being same quantity as a gravitational mass. Now let us look at a related problem. This is Newton's puzzle. When Newton formulated his dynamics in his famous book Principia Mathematica, he looked at the following problems. For example, you have an object and there is an observer. Object is moving uniformly. You can also have a situation where the object is stationary and the observer is moving. There is no difference between these two kinematically. There is no way to distinguish between these two situations in physics. Either the object can be moving or the observer can be moving. If it is uniform motion, there is absolutely no way of detecting this difference. Impossibility to feel or detect genuine uniform motion. This is called the principle of relativity. It was known from Galileo's time. It was refined by Poincaré and Einstein. But this is not true for all motions. For example, if you are in a rotating room and there is an object, you can rotate like that and the object stays stationary. But if the object is rotating, there is a force which is required to keep the object in its orbit. You have to tie a rope. There is a difference between these two situations. They have to tie a rope so that it goes around. There is a centrifugal force which is required, which has to be countered so that the object stays in the orbit. So if the motion is uniform, a new force appears. Centrifugal force, for example. So such forces are called pseudo forces or fictitious forces because there is no source. When you drop an object, when it falls towards the earth, we say that there is gravitation and then there is a source. Source is the earth. But things like centrifugal force or Coriolis force, they don't have any sources. We have not seen any source for such forces. But the forces are real. We feel it. When we are in an automobile, when it brakes, when it suddenly starts, we feel the force. But there is no source for such forces. They are called fictitious forces. But once you accept them as forces, we can use it in Newton's law as a like any other force with the same law. But what is surprising is that these fictitious forces also are proportional to their mass, just like gravity. Gravitational force is proportional to the mass. Fictitious forces also proportional to exactly the same mass. Why? We don't know. So sensible forces appear with non-uniform motion. The force is proportional to mass, just like gravity, but there is no source. Why is an inertial force? It's also called inertial force because it's proportional to inertia or mass. Why is it an inertial force? Why is an inertial force also proportional to mass? Modern physics that is matured over the last 400 years has no answer. So I am just telling you, stressing that though gravity is such a familiar interaction, the questions associated with it and the dual role of mass has not been answered in fundamental physics even after 400 years of advances in modern physics. So this question has been discussed from Newton's time. Then there was a philosopher physicist Ernst Mach who talked about this in a very deep and fundamental way. Finally, Albert Einstein asserted that gravity is also not a force, it is a fictitious force like a centrifugal force or a Coriolis force and so on, because gravity appears in an accelerated frame, which is what we are going to discuss next. There is something called Einstein's equivalence principle. We said there is called weak equivalence principle, which is the statement of the equality of the quantity called inertia and the quantity called gravitational mass, the source of gravity. Now, if there is gravity, two objects will fall at the same acceleration, that we know. Look at a situation. There's a room which is accelerating up like this. We see exactly the same observation, right? If two objects are falling in a gravitational field, where we feel in a room where we feel gravity, they fall at the same acceleration. But we cannot distinguish this situation from a room itself accelerating upwards. Then also we see that two objects are falling towards the floor of the room. We feel a force pulling us towards the floor of the room when the room is accelerating upwards. So these situations, they seem to be equivalent. That's when Einstein said the gravitational field G and the acceleration minus G, they seem to be exactly equivalent. This is called Einstein's equivalence principle. This is the same as saying that in free fall there is no gravitational field. Both are same. So Einstein said this for a specific reason. He wanted to build a theory of gravity. But how do you build a theory of gravity? That looks difficult. But suppose you construct a theory of dynamics in an accelerated room, in an accelerated frame, then that kind of a theory will be the theory of gravity because these two situations are equivalent. That was Einstein's logic. It's a brilliant leap of imagination and physical intuition. But it does not mean that in free fall there is no gravity. It's not that simple to construct a theory of gravity by just constructing the theory of dynamics or constructing the theory of relativity in an accelerated room, because there is a subtle difference between these two situations. What is the difference? You can easily see that. It's a simple fact. In a gravitational field, when two objects fall, they come closer a little bit. That is because the acceleration is towards the center of the Earth, right? So it is not exactly perpendicular to the surface, it is perpendicular to the curved surface of the Earth. So these two objects will come a bit close. Two objects which are falling, they don't fall straight down with the separation intact, they will come together a little bit. Whereas in an accelerated room, if you observe these two objects, they just fall towards the floor with their separation intact. So there is a difference between true gravity and apparent gravity in an accelerated room. Similarly, if two objects are falling towards the Earth with a slight separation in their distance, then they fall. As they fall, since the gravity at this point may be slightly larger than the gravity at this point, their separation will increase, which will not happen in an accelerated room. So there is a difference between these two situations. These are called tides. Two objects coming close together or separating from each other is called tide, which is very familiar to you, all of you. So tidal deviations cannot be eliminated by free fall. That's why I said in a spacecraft also, if you have a bob of water, it will not be spherical in shape, it will be slightly tidal distortion. That's a sign of gravity. So this is how you characterize gravitational field. Gravitational field is characterized by not just acceleration, there's a difference between two accelerations. And difference between two accelerations in the language of theory of gravity is called curvature. Okay, so that is why people say gravity is a theory of curvature of space-time or space and time. Now, where is time coming in? There is one more phenomenon we have to discuss, which is time dilation in a gravitational field, which is also Einstein's intuition and research that it brought out. Suppose you have a room which is accelerating upwards, and you emit some radiation from here which just goes up like that. So the room is accelerating upwards while you are emitting some radiation from here which is detected at the top of the room. What happens? Since the room is accelerating, its velocity is changing. After time t, velocity is v equal to a times t, acceleration times the time. Then the velocity here and the velocity here, velocity of emission and the velocity at detection are different. They are different by this amount, which means there will be a Doppler shift. So if you emit a radiation at the bottom of the room and it is received at the top of the room while it is accelerating up, you will see a Doppler shift. The frequency of detection will be slightly lower. This is given the Doppler shift formula, 1 minus v by c. Just like sound or light, everything will be Doppler shifted. Now, the difference in frequency is given by this quantity. Since v is a times t, you get this. And since the time taken is just the height of the room divided by the velocity of light, you get this final formula. This is called gravitational redshift, which was predicted by Einstein right in 1911, and it was experimentally verified in 1960 or so. Very famous experiment called Pound and Rabka experiment. But Einstein did more. Einstein said something of the following: because the accelerated room is equivalent to a room which is non-accelerated, but there is a gravitational field. There is Einstein's equivalence principle. Einstein said the same phenomenon will happen also in a gravitational field. In a gravitational field, if a radiation is emitted from a point to a point at a height, it will be redshifted because of gravitational effect. And this is called gravitational redshift, which is what was verified by Pound and Rabka. But Einstein said something very interesting, which is what one should now focus on. So a radiation which is emitted here and received there, of course, would be redshifted just like in an accelerated room. That's not a surprise because you need to use only the equivalence principle to know this. However, Einstein said the frequency of radiation, frequency is a number divided by a duration. Number cannot change. Number is just a number. Some n here will not change to n and something else here. So what should be changing is the duration or the time. So Einstein said, if there is gravitational redshift of radiation, then two clocks which is kept in a gravitational field with a distance also should not run at the same rate. Those two clocks cannot run at the same rate in a gravitational field. And Einstein said this phenomenon also should happen in a gravitational field, which is a different phenomenon than redshift. Two clocks in a gravitational field will run at the same rate. So there is a curvature in time as well. So this is why we can say gravity is a theory of curvatures in space and time. Okay. Now we can go to the physics of gravitational waves. We have gravity and electromagnetism. Is the only similarity between these two the inverse square law, or there is more? If you look at the electric field, which is very familiar, and the gravitational field looks exactly the same. Now there's another field in electromagnetism, which is a magnetic field, which is created by only currents of charges. If a charge is stationary, there is no magnetic field. For a magnetic field, the current has to be in motion in all cases. So the charges and currents are the fundamental quantities. Current is equivalent to a magnetic field, just a charge is equivalent to an electric field. Now, when we compare with gravity, does gravity has a magnetic-like field? No. Does moving masses generate a new field? We can ask this question. The electric charge which is moving generates a new kinds of field, which is called the magnetic field. Does a moving mass generate a new kind of field which we have not seen, which is not familiar to us? And that's a very fundamental question. If both are similar forces, then we would expect that a moving mass also generates a special kind of gravitational field, which will be similar to the magnetic field in electromagnetism. Of course, one important difference between these two interactions is that electric and magnetic fields do not have a electric charge. That is, the field doesn't itself, electric field and a magnetic field is created by electric charges. But the field itself doesn't have any electric charge. But that is not true for gravitational field, which looks very puzzling to you at this stage. What I mean is the following. You know that all forms of energy is equivalent to mass. And the famous relation is, of course, E equal to mc square, or m is equal to E by c square. All forms of energy is equivalent to mass. That means all forms of energy also generate a gravitational field. So it is not only mass which generates a gravitational field. All forms of energy also should generate gravitational fields. It's small, but it should generate. Therefore, all fields, including gravitational field, which carry energy, also generate gravitational field. Gravitational field can generate its own gravitational field, which can generate its own gravitational field and so on. So the gravitational field is a non-linear interaction because a certain amount of gravitational field has some energy. Therefore, it generates further gravitational fields, which doesn't happen in an electric field. Electric field doesn't have electric charge. So electric field doesn't generate further electric fields. So gravity is a non-linear interaction, which is a very important difference because that's why studying gravity is very complicated when you go to extremely dense mass systems like black holes and so on. So let's review gravity and electromagnetism. There are charges, electric field, there are Coulomb force, currents, which is amperes forces, magnetic fields are there. In gravity, there is of course the gravitational field, thus moving charges, rotating masses generate a gravitomagnetic field, a new kinds of gravitational field. We know that a magnet is essentially equivalent to a coil in which a current passes. And we also know that two currents, equal current, like currents will attract and the opposite currents will repel. These are basic laws of electromagnetism. Whatever masses, suppose two masses are moving close to each other, will they repel or attract? It turns out that in gravity, two like currents of masses, that is two moving masses, repel each other. In electromagnetism, they attract. In gravity, they repel each other. This is results from Einstein's theory. Also, two rotating masses like the Earth and the Moon, actually there is a small attraction because of this gravitomagnetic effect, which is very small, we cannot measure it, but this has been seen in certain other experiments. So it is called Gravity Probe B, an experiment done by Stanford University in a space experiment. This kind of tiny gravitational magnetism has been measured. So why I wanted to say this was, in gravity also, there is a gravitational electric-like field and a magnetic-like field, which is very small. It's very difficult to see it, but it's possible to see it if you put a gyroscope in an orbit around the Earth. It will precess, exactly like in magnetic field, magnetic moments precess. It is a very small because it is related to the formula. It is just a gravitational potential multiplied by the rotation rate and so on. So this, we don't have to go into details. I just want to say that it's an extremely small effect, which is very, very difficult to measure, but people have measured these things. But now the important thing is, once you have an electric-like and a magnetic-like field in any interaction, you can have waves, exactly like in Maxwell's theory. Electric and magnetic field generate waves, electromagnetic waves. So what can be learned from the small number of facts discussed so far? Gravity is very much like electromagnetism. It's a long-range interaction. It is non-linear. The energy in the gravitational field is the source of gravity. Because of the universal equivalence of mass and inertia, a geometrical description of the gravitational interaction is possible. You don't have to talk about gravity as an interaction. You can talk about changes in the spatial distance and changes in the clock rates and so on, space and time. Now, let's look at how electromagnetic waves are generated. If a charge accelerates, we know that there is electromagnetic waves emitted. When a charge moves, does the electric field moves with it? You can ask this question. That's the question I want to address here. A charge at a point suddenly start accelerating. Does all the electric field, which is radial from that charge, moves with the charge? It cannot. When there is a movement of the charge, the field near the charge will of course expected to move with it. But what about field far away from the charge, which doesn't even know that this charge has moved by a short distance here, because nothing can travel faster than light. So if you look at a large distance, it is just the old field. Very close to the charge, it should be the new field, which is following the charge. So there are two kinds of field. Far away from the charge, it is as if the charge has not moved. Very close to the charge, the field has moved. Then the two will be connected in this particular fashion. So the field of an accelerated charge will look like this. There's a radial part and there is a transverse part, which is what we call radiation. It is this part which we call radiation, which moves out at the velocity of light. Like this. So there is a transverse field and there is a radial field, and this moves as the time progresses. This kink will move forward, and that is what we call radiation. And we can easily derive the formula, radiation formula, which some of you may have studied. The ratio between the transverse field and the radial field can be written here. This is V times T, the distance moved by the charge, and this distance is C times T. So this is a ratio, and then there's an angle factor sine theta. Since V by T is acceleration, we can write it as this. And since T is the distance divided by C, distance divided by the velocity of light, this can be written as AR sine theta. So it's a very simple formula. But we know what is E radial. We know what is a field, Coulomb field of a charge. It is charge divided by R square, cube divided by R square. So we use that formula. Acceleration is double derivative of the separation of the charge, the coordinate of the charge. The acceleration is given by d square r by dt square. So that is what I indicated with two dots here. So we get that radiation formula in electromagnetism from very simple geometry. This is the exact formula for radiation in Maxwell's electromagnetism. What is called radiation formula, dipole radiation formula. The reason is very simple. Charge has accelerated very suddenly. Then there is a transverse field because field cannot change instantaneously. And that is given by just these geometrical factors. Same thing we can ask about gravitational waves. If a mass starts accelerating suddenly, we expect there will be gravitational waves, transverse waves. If the basic physics is similar, everything should be simply related like this. Then we have solved the problem of gravitational waves in a very, very elementary fashion with just high school geometry and equations. Is it true? It turns out gravity is much more complicated. That's why it took decades to understand and study gravitational waves. Let's look at what is an electromagnetic wave. A charge moves up and down, accelerate, it emits electromagnetic wave. What about an accelerated mass which is oscillating up and down? This is a picture we have. A mass is accelerating up and down periodically. But this cannot happen. This picture is wrong. It will never happen that a mass connected to a base by a spring moves up and down like this, because we have to respect the conservation of momentum. If a mass moves up and down, its support also should move up and down in the opposite way. If this is a very massive support, it should move very slightly, but the product is exactly same. But that's what the conservation of momentum says. If that is the case, both will emit gravitational waves. If this emits gravitational waves, the other mass also will emit gravitational waves, but now in opposite phase. So therefore, gravitational waves may be generated by accelerating masses, but they cancel out to zero. Also in this direction, in the direction of acceleration, the waves cannot be emitted. Only in the transverse direction the waves are emitted. So there is no gravitational waves because it seems to be cancelling out everywhere. So it's a disaster for the theory of gravitation that because of conservation of momentum, it seems it is impossible to emit gravitational waves. But not quite, because if you look at an angle here, when these two masses move up and down, there's a slight phase difference between these two waves which are emitted at an angle. One is emitted slightly earlier than the other one, which is emitted slightly later. So because of this phase difference, there is a residual wave, the difference of these two waves, which comes out. I don't want to go into the formula now. What I want to say is that it is this difference of the waves from two accelerating masses we call the gravitational waves. That's why it is extremely weak, apart from the fact that gravitational constant is also very weak. Instead of dipole moment, what appears here is the quantity mr square, which is a quadrupole moment. Okay, so that is a basic physics of the gravitational waves is contained in this transparency in this slide. There cannot be any gravitational waves in this transverse directions, but there is gravitational waves emitted in this angular directions. Now you can guess that there is no wave here, there is no wave here, but there is a wave in this direction. Therefore, there is also a wave in this direction, that direction, and this direction. So there are four directions, 90 degrees apart. We have emission of gravitational waves. That's why it is called a quadrupole kind of a geometry. But how do we detect this gravitational wave? There is a basic problem, because everything falls with the same acceleration in a gravitational field. So everything falls with the same acceleration in the gravitational field of the wave as well. If everything moves exactly identically, we cannot detect it. So detecting gravitational waves is a difficult task. You cannot detect gravitational waves directly using a mass. Mass will move, but we also will move with the mass, and we cannot detect that the mass is moving relative to us. We can only detect the difference of the effect of gravitational waves at 2 points in space, a tidal field, and the strain. That is why it is called a strain. We cannot detect the motion of one mass at a particular point. We can see the difference in the motion of two masses separated by a distance. And that is why it is a strain which has to be detected to detect gravitational waves. And the formula is a very simple formula. It depends on the mass of the source, depends on the velocity of the source, a square here, with the gravitational constant and the velocity of light. It's a very simple formula. And you notice that exactly like in electromagnetism, the strength of the gravitational wave reduces as 1 by r, transverse waves. What's the action of gravitational waves when it comes to Earth? When an electromagnetic wave, we know how to detect. You use a simple antenna. In an antenna, when electromagnetic waves come, it accelerates charges in a metal conductor, and that's what we detect as electromagnetic waves. Similarly, to detect gravitational waves, instead of charges, we have to use masses. We just suspend two masses on some long wire, and then there is a separation between these two. When the gravitational waves arrive, they move these masses. If the masses are very close to each other, they move together. But if they have some separation, the displacement of this mass will be slightly different from the displacement of that mass. So there is a differential displacement, which is what we have to detect. So it looks like this. If we have four masses, which is arranged in a circle, and the gravitational wave passes through, something like this will happen. This is what we have to detect. Now, there's a natural detector for this, which is called a Michelson interferometer, which you have seen. There's a source of light. There is a beam splitter. There are two mirrors. And the differential motion of these two mirrors, if one mirror is moving with respect to the other mirror, the fringes will change here, and that's what we detect. So Michelson interferometer is a natural detector for gravitational waves. But the strain, if you calculate, it's extremely small. It is 10⁻⁹ or 10 to the -20 meters per meter separation, which, as I said, is only a less than a billionth of the diameter of an atom. So how do we detect this? It's such a small thing. And what do we expect? If you have an astrophysical source which is going around, it'll emit gravitational waves, and the orbit will shrink and collapse. Therefore, the frequency will increase, the amplitude will increase as it starts from a large separation. Then separation decreases, it speeds up and collapses, and we expect the frequency increasing and the amplitude increasing. And you can note that for orbits of very compact objects like black holes, orbits which are size of maybe 100 kilometers or so, these objects will be moving at 10–20% of the velocity of light. So the frequency of these waves are at audio frequency. What we expect is some hum like a signal for some time, and then the frequency will increase and suddenly increase and stop. Something like that. That's a signal. It is called a chirp. Using Kepler's law, we can, from the frequency, we can estimate the mass and so on, because we have the relation between mass and radius for a black hole. For a black hole, its radius is always related to the mass directly. It is just proportional to mass. Therefore, all these parameters can be estimated just from this frequency, and that is how what is done. So let me see the time, because we have been going a bit slow. Okay, I want to point out something very important. Gravitational waves are radiating part of the changing gravity of a massive source, exactly similar to the conceptual status as an electromagnetic wave. This you should understand very carefully. There is no real conceptual difference between an electromagnetic wave and a gravitational wave. Gravitational waves move the masses and affect anything with a mass or energy. Just like electromagnetic wave affects anything with an electric charge. But because of the universality of free fall, there is a description of gravity in terms of the geometrical relation between masses. When two masses are there, there is a separation, which we call space. Also, since gravity can affect material clocks, it is possible to say gravity affects time. Gravity doesn't affect time, gravity affects clocks, which is what we call time essentially. But if there is no matter anywhere, there is no time. If there are no clocks at all, there is no matter at all. In empty space, you cannot have time. You can think about this. I don't want to spend time on it, but you think of empty space without any matter. You cannot even define time. You cannot feel time. You cannot measure time. So there is no sense to talk about space and time without matter. So space and time cannot be observed. We can only observe matter, the separation between matter, material clocks, how they measure time, and so on. Space and time are essential concepts required for physics, but they are unobservable metaphysical elements of physics. They are not like matter. They are really metaphysical elements. So please don't learn to parrot the empty but popular saying, gravitational waves are ripples in the fabric of space-time. There is no fabric of space-time. It is not a physical entity at all. It is just a side remark. So Michelson interferometer is a fundamental tool for precision metrology, as you know, because light wavelength is of the order of a micrometer. So if you have a small change in the phase of that light, even a fraction like a nanometer, you can detect using an interferometer. This I don't want to go into details, but let's skip this. What I wanted to say was, you cannot measure any small change. It is fundamentally limited by the properties of light, the quantum properties of light. For example, if you want to measure a fringe, a bright fringe and a dark fringe, when you move a bright fringe a little bit, you can measure that very precisely using an interferometer, but not arbitrarily precisely, because light consists of photons. There are a certain number of photons, and the noise in that number is called a short noise, is the order of square root of n. So if there are 10 to the power of 20 photons per second from a laser, it always has a noise of square root of n, which is 10 to the 10 photons. So therefore, you cannot detect the change in fringes arbitrarily precisely. You have this noise, which is a fundamental limit called the short noise. So with a 10 watt of optical power, you have 10 to the 20 photons per second, which has a noise of 10 to the 10. Therefore, the smallest distance change, which you can measure with a particular Michelson interferometer using 10 watt of optical power, corresponds to that noise, not to the number, but to the noise, which amounts to about 10 to the minus 16 meters with 10 watt of optical power in a Michelson interferometer. But so that means even if you have a 1 kilometer long interferometer, for detecting a strain of 10 to the minus 19, we have to detect 10 minus 19 meter displacement. But we can only measure 10 minus 16 meter even with 10 watts. You can increase it to 100 watts, but it only increases as square root of n. So we have to fold the optical path several times. And folding the optical path several times, there's a technique. This is called a Fabry-Perot interferometer, a Fabry-Perot cavity. There's a cavity in which light goes back and forth several times, maybe 300 or 500 times. That way, we increase the effective length of the interferometer. 1 kilometer interferometer will look like a 500 kilometer interferometer. That's a technique which is required to reach the sensitivity required to detect gravitational waves. So a gravitational wave detector looks like this. It's an interferometer. It's a Michelson interferometer. Basically, there's a beam splitter and there are two mirrors here. There's a laser, but light which is entering this interferometer is reflected back and forth in a cavity 300 or 400 times. That is why these two mirrors are here. Then the light which is going out is again recycled back maybe 30 or 40 times. So you use several cavities to increase the total light which is used in this detector. Of course, you need very good vacuum, a trillionth of atmospheric pressure. So all this instrument, which is kilometers in size, is enclosed in vacuum chambers, gigantic vacuum chambers with a length of 4 kilometers in each arm. So you can see the technology needed to construct a gravitational interferometer is enormous. Extremely quiet laser, these cavities, controls, vacuum, and all that. If you do all this, you can build a gravitational wave detector. However, there is ground vibrations. You want to detect 10 to the minus 19 or 10 to the minus 20 meters, but the ground vibrations are like 1 micrometer, 1 micron. How do you detect 10 minus 20 meters when you have vibrations of 1 micrometer? It turns out to be easy. That is why if you hang a mass on several springs. If you vibrate the support at some amplitude, because of the springs, the vibration will be attenuated when it reaches here. For each spring, the attenuation goes as 1 by frequency square. If the spring frequency is 10 hertz, and you want to look at 100 hertz here, the attenuation, the vibration here will be attenuated by one spring by a factor of 100. Okay, so therefore, using multiple springs, you can easily attenuate vibrations as much as you want in principle. So if the ground vibrations are 1 micron, the vibrations at the mirror, which is suspended on such springs, can be reduced to 10⁻⁹ meters by using several springs, different stages of spring, 3 or 4 stages of springs and pendulum, which are resonance around 1 hertz, will attenuate vibration of 1 micron here to about 10⁻20 meters here. So that's a technique for reducing vibrations. You can see this is the actual mirrors used in the LIGO gravitational wave detectors, suspended from springs and things like that. You can see they are pendulums suspended. There is a detector in Europe called Virgo, which uses a very elaborate 10-meter high building and vibration isolation, which is a cascade of springs. And at the end of this, you have a mirror. And you can see it's a very elaborate arrangement. So if you do that, you have a short noise coming from the laser noise, the quantum noise, which is mentioned as square root of n noise. There are thermal noise because you are operating at temperature. There is radiation pressure from the laser. All that noise becomes very high at very low frequencies, like 1 hertz or so. But from about 20-30 hertz, those noises are under control. And the seismic noise is very large, but they can be reduced by using springs at a very low frequency. And it can also be made very steep by using multiple stages of vibration isolation. So finally, the sensitivity of a gravitational wave detector, what you can detect, is represented by a curve like this, like a bucket curve, which is frequency and strain plotted in this y-axis. How much displacement can you detect? And today's gravitational wave detectors like LIGO and Virgo can detect a strain of even 10⁻23, which means it can measure much less than a billionth of an atomic size, that kind of displacement. And this is what is used to see gravitational waves which is coming from distant galaxies, some two masses like 2 black holes or 2 pulsars going around each other very fast and collapsing into each other because they are emitting gravitational waves and losing energy, which is a signal which we started with. This is a signal emitted by a binary black hole very far away, millions of light years ago. It has come to these 2 detectors separated by 3,000 kilometers and moved the mirrors in the Michelson interferometer in both these detectors relatively, and that vibrations of those suspended mirrors is what is plotted here. So you see, the event happened very large distance away from us in a distant galaxy. The gravitational waves traveled all the way for billions of years, reached the Earth, and perturbed 2 mirrors suspended in these interferometers, and which is measured. It's a very remarkable achievement if you think about this. Why do we need many detectors? Gravitational wave detectors are not telescopes. They cannot pinpoint a source. The wave comes, they move the mirrors here and here. All we can measure is the time difference between the arrival of these gravitational waves in the two detectors. If they come perpendicular, exactly perpendicular, perturbing the two detectors exactly at the same time, then we can say that they are coming straight down. But if they come at an angle, this will come to the first detector first and this second detector later. And this time delay we can measure. From this time delay, since the velocity of these waves are same as the velocity of light, c, because it all depends coming from the same theory of relativity. We know this particular distance, this angle, and therefore we know the angle in the sky with two detectors. But we need two angles to locate a source in the sky. Therefore, at least three detectors are required to locate a source in the sky, very much like a GPS localizing you on the Earth while you navigate. So you need at least three detectors to locate a source in the sky. So one detector is not enough. And if you go to the website of the LIGO collaboration, you can see now already about 50 sources have been detected after the first detection in 2015. And I don't want to go into these details. You can look at the website where there is a lot of information available on this. There has been a triple coincidence also, all the three detectors, two LIGO detectors in the USA and one detector in the Europe detecting the same event in coincidence. So this is a kind of detection which is happening these days very routinely. It also happened exactly one event so far where the gravitational waves as well as gamma rays from the same event was detected once. So gravitational wave detectors detected the gravitational waves, and the gamma ray telescope, which is in orbit, what is called the Fermi gamma ray detector, it detected signal exactly at the same time. Then people found out that it came from a distant galaxy, and they also inferred that it is two neutron stars going around each other, emitting gravitational waves and collapsing into each other, which is a very, very rare event. And this is a remarkable event which allowed people to do a lot of new astronomy. So that is how, as you know, in 2017, three leaders of this activity. Of course, this is an activity which involved more than 1,000 physicists and engineers, but three leaders who worked on all this for decades, they were given the Nobel Prize. Rainer Weiss, who led the instrumentation aspect of LIGO detectors, Barry Barish, who managed the entire collaboration, and Kip Thorne, who was a driving spirit and theoretician behind all these efforts. So these people were given the Nobel Prize in 2015 for this activity. And today, what is called multi-messenger astronomy is very much in activity. Gravitational waves, gamma rays, radio waves, neutrinos, everything. The attempt is to look at the same sources at the same time with multiple detectors, which is called multi-messenger. The messenger is come in different form: gravitational waves, neutrinos, gamma rays, radio waves, infrared waves, and so on. And the attempt is to detect all this together with different instruments from the same sources at the same time or with the time delay, and use that to study very detailed astronomy about these objects in the sky. This is called multi-messenger astronomy, which is a very, very active area today. Now, just 5 minutes to finish. In the Nobel Prize information itself, or even later and so on, there are two new attempts, two new initiatives which are listed. which is one is a Kamioka gravitational wave detector, KAGRA, in Japan, and what is called LIGO India in India, which is a US collaboration. Let's look at that. The LIGO India project is the construction and operation of an advanced gravitational wave detector in India in collaboration with LIGO Lab. So there are 2 LIGO detectors in the US, exactly similar detector in India. So there's a 3 detector network. As I said, 3 detectors are required to locate a source on the sky. The plan was 2022 when we proposed it in 2011. Now 2022 has already come. We are not moved very much. So it is something which will happen only in future. You can go at this particular website in IUCA and get a lot of details on this project as well as all the associated projects in gravitational wave detection. It is supposed to come up in a place called Hingoli in Maharashtra. It looks like this, a little better than this today. And the plan is to have a detector which looks like a 4-kilometer detector, which will look like this when it is completed. Now the time frame, the LIGO and the Virgo detectors are already operating. The KAGRA detector in Japan has just started operating. They are in schedule. It will be used for gravitational wave detection very soon. It means there are 4 detectors, 2 LIGO, Virgo, KAGRA. LIGO India, though planned in 2011, it is still lagging. 2026 it is supposed to come up now. Then there will be a detector of gravitational wave detectors, a network of gravitational wave detectors all over the world. 2 LIGO, Virgo in Europe, which is operating in Pisa, KAGRA in Japan, LIGO India here. Question is, will 2026-27 is it realistic? According to me, no. It will only come up maybe in 2032, according to me, which is very, very unfortunate, but that is what the situation is. There is also a plan to put a detector in space, which is called the LISA detector, where instead of 4 kilometers, mirrors separated by 4 kilometers, this is mirrors separated by 2.5 million kilometers. And it's difficult to imagine, I know, but it's a particular kind of detector, a space detector, which is supposed to detect waves from very, very massive black holes and so on, like a black hole with a million or a more times mass than the sun. Those kind of black holes emit very low frequency gravitational waves, and it's very difficult to detect unless you go to space, because you cannot detect, you cannot suppress seismic vibrations below 1 hertz effectively on Earth. So you have to go to space, and since you are detecting very low frequency gravitational waves, you need very long arm length, and this is a plan. It's called LISA. Then there is a plan for 2030s. There are plans for 2 very large underground gravitational wave detectors. One is called Einstein Telescope, another is called Cosmic Explorer, which cannot go to below 1 hertz, but even up to 1 hertz. It's a grand challenge, very difficult project, but 10-kilometer arm length. You can see that since we detected the gravitational waves in 2015, now there is no doubt about the physics involved, the technology involved, and so on. Now it's an era of improvement in the detection techniques and sensitivity, where people want to see the whole universe. Whatever sources to the end of the universe, all can be seen if we build a detector which is 10-kilometer size and which can go to 1 hertz. That's the idea. So you see what kind of challenges, technological challenges people are willing to take, and of course it costs a lot of money as well. Now, the last question. So there are so many predictions of general theory of relativity, all of which has been verified. And finally, the gravitational waves also are detected after 100 years. can we consider general relativity to be a complete classical theory of gravity covering all gravitational phenomena? No, because general theory of relativity assumes the equivalence principle. It cannot explain it. General theory of relativity, Einstein's theory cannot explain the origin of inertia. It cannot explain the origin of centrifugal forces. It treats even gravity as equivalent to a pseudo force. General theory of relativity assumes empty space. Minkowski, because it assumes special relativity as its basis. And special relativity is a theory of relativity set up in empty space. And rejects absolute frame. It assumes that relative velocity of light is an invariant. These are all assumptions. These are not experimental results. If any of these assumptions is found non-exact, then Einstein's theory needs modification. Now the question is, it is very fragile in some sense. It's a very robust theory in some sense because we tested various predictions, but it's also fragile because its basic assumptions. There are so many open things. It has left too many open assumptions. So it is also very fragile in that sense. So the question is it even imaginable that this big structure of GTR, general theory of relativity, will be broken by some small prick which is related to a question concerning inertia, the dual role of inertia, or the origin of inertial forces and things like that? Is it imaginable? It is, because general theory of relativity is built on special relativity, and it assumes far away from massive objects or in free fall, physics reduces to special relativity. It's a very important assumption which used to construct general theory of relativity. But there is no place in our matter-filled universe where this assumption is true. You cannot go far away from massive objects or in free fall, because there is no place in the universe where there is no matter. Wherever you go, there is matter. There is no empty space. For example, if you look in the universe, there are so many stars, galaxies, and so on. And if you move in this universe, you see a current of this matter. Anywhere, wherever you go, there is no empty space. There is no space in this universe where strictly special theory can be valid. In fact, there is also, we know that there is a frame, absolute frame, using which we can measure our velocity very accurately and so on. We have no time to discuss it, but if you're using cosmic microwave background in the universe, it's a radiation coming from all directions. Just by measuring its Doppler shift, we can measure our velocity very accurately. So therefore, if we are really moving, we know we are moving by looking at the cosmic microwave background. So the question Newton asked, whether we can detect real motion and fake motion, whether we can distinguish between the two, it is possible today. So therefore, there is really an absolute frame available to us. And all this is discussed in a open paper which I wrote recently. So people who are very curious about how our fundamental theories can go wrong, and definitely go wrong, can look at this publication. You will see how it can go wrong. So the serious problem with current theories of physics, current theories of relativity and dynamics, is easy to state. All our fundamental theories of physical world were completed well before we acquired significant knowledge about the physical universe in 1916, 1905 and all that. But modern cosmology started only after Hubble's discovery in 1929. So before 1920s, we were thinking that our universe is generally empty. So therefore, we constructed the special theory of relativity in an empty space, general theory of relativity in empty space. But after 1929, we learned that universe has a lot of matter, and this matter has gravity. So space is not empty. It has matter and gravity everywhere. So all physics and human activities are done in this enormous gravitational potential. But our fundamental theories are constructed without these effects. Whereas in reality, there is a lot of gravitational effects from the matter in the universe, whereas in our fundamental theories, these effects are not included. So the theories are either incorrect or incomplete. This is what I said is discussed in this paper. You can also look at my YouTube channels where there are several talks on this. The point is, our theories will definitely change. Though we are having great activity in astronomy using gravitational waves and general theory of relativity, these theories are definitely going to change. Thank you very much.